My name is Dan, and lots of people think I'm a spy. I'm not a spy, I'm just super international, both in terms of my life experience, citizenships, and outlook. I'm gonna tell you how I got there and some of the craziest experiences I've had in the nearly 100 countries I visited and 5 countries I've lived in up until today at the age of 38. It's a very unique experience because when you travel to other places in the world, it's full of tourists and you don't really feel like you get to see local people. I grew up in suburban Boston and would say I had a pretty typical childhood. But I made a bunch of decisions from a pretty young age to live all over the world, and it's led me to lead a pretty unconventional life. And I'm here on my YouTube channel to talk about what that life has looked like. From living almost half of my life abroad, almost all of my adult years have been across 5 countries.
And economic development of the Republic of South Africa.
I grew up in the historic town of Lexington, Massachusetts. It's where the Revolutionary War happened. It's a town of about 30,000, about 25 minutes outside of downtown Boston. The first time I went abroad actually was when I was a baby. So my first time out of the country, my parents took me to Toronto, which is actually ironically where I am right now for the summer. But my first time abroad, I might have been 1 or maybe under 1, and they took me to Amsterdam and Brussels. So I was actually traveling internationally, and again, this is in the 1980s from a very young age, and I think it seeped into my blood at that point. I think that my first trip that I really enjoyed as a young person was in 7th grade. So I went to a summer camp outside of Boston and just didn't have a good experience. I went for a few summers and I realized that for the same amount of money, I could actually start going on teen tours to different parts of the world. So in 7th grade, for the same price as going to summer camp in Massachusetts, I did a teen tour to Western Europe and Israel, and it was over a month. And we visited so many countries, and I was with other 7th graders. And I think that because that tour was built for people around my age, I actually had a positive experience. And around that time, around again, sort of 13, 14 years old, I think that's when I started to develop Wanderlust. And I used to go to my elementary school, this is when I was even younger, my elementary school library, and I would read books about other parts of the world. I read books about South Africa. They might have been books about Nelson Mandela. And I was so captivated by the colors, by the diversity. There was just something about South Africa that really fascinated me. I also remember there was a picture book about South Africa and all the different cultural groups in the country. And so when I was in, I believe 8th grade, I begged my dad to take me and my brother to South Africa, and we went. And I remember stepping off the plane in Cape Town, and the colors were so bright and the air was so different. It was unlike anywhere else I had previously visited. And we had the most incredible week. We met local people. And one of the things we did while I was in South Africa is we went to a local school. And it was a Jewish school, and at that school, the principal said, if you want, kind of like in jest, if you want to go to my school, you're more than welcome to come for a year. And after this fantastic trip, I sort of went on a lobbying campaign and begged my parents to allow me to move to South Africa and take that principal up on his offer for a year, and my parents agreed. So we put an ad in a synagogue newsletter in Cape Town, and we found a local family. So she was a single mother with 3 sons who needed the money and had a spare bedroom. And long story short, I moved to South Africa at the age of 14. My parents flew with me, and I went to live with this woman and her sons for an entire year. Going to school in South Africa was so different. because I was 14 years old, I really wanted to, sort of just blend in, because I think kids don't really want to be very different from their peers. And I would say probably within the first 3 months, I completely changed my accent. I mean, it took work. I used to practice, but my brain was sort of flexible enough at the time that I really could change my accent. And so I did. And I had a South African accent after 3 months. And it was funny because after maybe 4 or 5 months of being in South Africa, I actually went back to the US for the first time to visit. And I had a full-on foreign accent, and people couldn't understand how it happened so quickly.
Mature vocal, but I've recently moved down to Cape Town to follow the man of my dreams. This is my car. This is my baby. And these are my goals. I miss you guys.
But yeah, I can speak with a South African accent. I actually am a South African citizen. But when I lived in South Africa as an adult, which I'll talk about, I spoke like an American. So I sounded foreign. And all the relationships I was in, the serious relationships, were with South Africans. And many of my closest friends are South African. And even Peanut, who's my dog, he's also South African. It was highly unusual. People couldn't believe that, like, as a 14-year-old, I was going to go live on the other side of the world. I was pretty heavily bullied in school and didn't really have a very positive, especially middle school experience. So I think my parents just knew that I needed a change. And again, I really do appreciate the fact that they encouraged me to do things like that. From what I remember, we arrived in South Africa at night when I moved, and my parents were with me, but I remember feeling enormously homesick like that first night, even though my parents were there, and then realizing the enormity of what I had just done. My first night, my parents slept at a bed and breakfast, and I actually slept in like my new bedroom in the woman's house the first night. So it gave me a taste of being on my own. And yeah, I was incredibly homesick. But I think that what really helped was building and this has actually been something that I've developed everywhere I've moved in the world, is part of being happy when you move to a new place is developing a routine. So I think that for me, once I, started going to school, started making friends, developed a routine, had classes that I liked, I was a lot less homesick, and I really began to appreciate living there. But I think that for me, from the age of 14, I started to realize that home wasn't the place that I grew up in. Home could be a place that I choose. So I've never understood, there's some people that say, well, I have to live in a place because I'm from that place. That has never been my attitude. My attitude has always been, we don't choose where we were born, we don't choose where we grew up, but we can choose where we want to spend the majority of our lives. So there was a big question after this incredible year in South Africa about, was I going to finish high school there? Was I going to move back to the US? And I think there was kind of an expectation that I was going to leave after a year. But I definitely was thinking about staying another year, and I did move back to the US, and I realized it was a big mistake. I moved back for 10th grade. I was very unhappy moving back to the US. I went from a very colorful environment, very diverse, just totally different value system, history, to just being back to where I was from. And it kind of felt like all of the nutrients were sucked out of the food. I had this very flavorful dish during my year in South Africa. And then I went back to suburban Boston, and it was gray, it was cold. I had seen the world. I had also traveled, while I was in South Africa, I did an exchange program with Israel. I traveled around the country, and I had changed, but my peers hadn't changed. So it was almost like going back in time, and I had deep regrets that I decided to move back to Boston and that I didn't stay for longer. So it was certainly an adjustment. I came back with a South African accent, and some people were kind of made fun of me for that. Eventually, I transitioned back to an American accent, but I definitely came back to the US feeling like a foreigner and feeling like I had changed. Next, I'll tell you about how that year in South Africa solidified my decision to move out of the US and continue to live abroad, which I wound up doing up until today.